Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at our Learn at Home webinar series that the University of Rhode Island Cooperative Extension and the College of Environment and Life Sciences is putting on for us. We're so excited to be able to bring you a presentation today all about planting a vegetable garden. I was just telling Vivian Shaw, who is our wonderful URI Master Gardener presenter, that this is something that I'm really excited to learn about because we are putting in a vegetable garden at our house. So hopefully a lot of you guys have some good gardening plans this weekend and we can get you kind of motivated and excited and full of research-based knowledge as you head out into the garden in this beautiful weather. So Vivian, if you'd like to click the next slide, we'll get started. So this program is brought to you by the University of Rhode Island Cooperative Extension. I know we have folks on the call from all across the country, so we're so glad to have you here. There is actually a land-grant university in every state of the country, and for Rhode Island, it's the University of Rhode Island. And Cooperative Extension's mission is all about bringing the knowledge and the science base of the land-grant university system to our communities. And that's why we're glad to bring you this workshop series. Here in Rhode Island, we have a number of different strategic focus areas for cooperative extension. So in addition to learning about gardening through our Master Gardener program, we have programs around land stewardship, food systems and agriculture, water resources, energy, literacy, and healthy lifestyles. And of course, today's program is going to cover a lot of these bases, actually. Hit the next slide, please. And we're really glad to be able to present via webinar today because this helps us bring information. I think it really increases the access to our programs just by having them online, of course, while we're all at home. And so our guiding principles are really all about social justice and helping improve quality of life and the health of our environment through our educational programs. We hope that you continue joining us at these webinar series. A few little housekeeping notes is that we will actually have recordings posted of our classes. Give us a week or so to get them edited and up on our URI Cooperative Extension YouTube pages. And we're hoping to hold these workshops twice weekly, at least for the next few months. So my name is Vanessa Venturini. I'm the state program leader of the URI Master Gardener program. Our mission is all about educating residents in environmentally sound gardening practices through the dissemination of factual, research-based information. We know that there's a lot of information out there, and we're so glad that you're coming to us to learn more. And so today it is my distinct pleasure to introduce your speaker for this afternoon, who is Vivian Shaw. She is a URI Master Gardener class of 2013. She actually is one of our gardening hotliners, so she answers questions for folks through our URI gardening hotline, which we'll speak about later. She is a lifelong vegetable gardener, so she was inspired as a very young child to begin growing her own food alongside her father. I think many of the folks on this call will relate to that you had an experience early in your life and it led you to a life of wanting to grow your own food. Vivian, in addition to that, she's a soil tester and she works with a number of different community gardens in Rhode Island, helping them be better gardeners, but also grow food for donation to the hungry. And we're so excited to have Vivian here to share her knowledge and some of the good resources that will help you all be more successful in your vegetable gardens. So it is my pleasure to introduce Vivian Shaw.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'm happy to be here today with all of you. I'm excited that there's so many people on this webinar. I welcome all of you. The principles I'm going to be talking about today are, doesn't matter where you live, on some of the most specific things that I'll be talking about. I will say that you'll have to check with your local extension agency to see when planting, etc., is best in your area. But for us in Rhode Island, we are still just now getting warm. So I live in southern Rhode Island and it has been quite chilly in the evening. that soil temperature is still in the 50s, so we're still a little bit chilly. So what do plants need? Well, plants need sunlight, water, and nutrients, and they get their nutrients from the soil. So when you pick out a site for your garden, it needs to have these three conditions. Level is better so that there's not standing water on heavy rains, but not absolutely necessary. So let's talk about sunlight first. A lot of vegetables, the fruit-bearing ones, need at least 6 hours of sunlight a day. So the warm vegetables, the warm weather vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, eggplant, they need a lot of sun. Now there's always ways to create shade, but we can't create more sun. So you need to pick a site that has plenty of sun. For other leafy vegetables like lettuce, chard, kale, and your root crops, beets, radishes, carrots, etc., they need some partial shade or dappled shade. This shade can be created by planting these plants in among the other plants. You can do that easily, but or put the taller plants on the sunny side of your garden and the shaded plants away from the taller plants, and that'll work just fine. So as long as you're getting enough sun, plants should grow. The next important thing is soil. So again, plants need nutrients. They get their nutrients from their roots through the soil, and you need to have a really good soil in order to get a real healthy plant. The first thing you need to do is check for pH. So the pH, people say, why is pH so important for soil? Well, I want you to think of it this way. Thinking of being outside a chocolate shop. You need chocolate. You want chocolate, but you can't get any because the store is closed. So you have a barrier between you and the chocolate, which is the windows and the door. Well, plants need nutrients, but if they can't get them, they can't absorb the nutrients from the soil if the pH is not right. Now here in Rhode Island, we have pretty acidic soil, most in the 4 or 5 range, and most vegetables require 5.5 to a 7 range. So 7 is a neutral pH, below 7 is acidic, above 7 is alkaline. So I'm going to leave this up for a second just so that you can kind of see, but most plants, not potatoes. Potatoes like it a little more acidic, but most plants like it in the neutral range. Even your lawn and most flowers like it in the neutral range. So they're happiest more neutral. So if your soil is more acidic, then you need to amend that. Well, how do you know if your plants are acidic? Well, the most important first step is to test your soil. You can test your soil by digging through your soil, use different areas and avoid areas that have been recently limed or fertilized, and put your soil, approximately a cup or so of soil, in a plastic bag, or a paper bag is actually really good, and let it dry out. If you're trying to get soil and it's been pretty wet out, you want to have that soil dry. You can also lay it out on a piece of newspaper or paper and let it dry, and then bag it or put it in a Ziploc bag or a Tupperware container of some kind. Now, unfortunately, master gardeners in Rhode Island are not able to do soil testing right now at least till June 30th. So we normally have a lot of free pH testing sites available April to September. But unfortunately, with the virus, we are not able to do that at this point. The University of Connecticut, you can get a complete soil test done that will test nutrients, lead levels, and other soil characteristics. The University of Massachusetts does soil testing too, but unfortunately they are currently closed also. If you're going to get a complete test from the University of Connecticut, there is a small fee for that. If you need to get a soil test from the University of Connecticut, you can contact the University of Connecticut Cooperative Education, and they will send you the link on how to take a soil test and submit a soil test. So we have our natural soil. Now, blending it with other things will really help the soil. So what is recommended is a third of compost, peat moss, or cocoa coir. So cocoa coir is extracted from the outer husk of a coconut. Peat moss is not really sustainable. Once you harvest peat moss, it takes a very long time for peat moss to grow. So some companies are using the outer husk of coconuts to mix in, and that has also worked. Vermiculite is also to lighten the soil. Fertilizers are essential for growing plants. You'll see on a fertilizer bag, NPK. N is nitrogen, that's for leaf growth. P is phosphorus for root growth. Potassium is the K, and that's for plant vigor and disease and stress resistance. I personally am an organic vegetable gardener. I use fish emulsion, which is a 511. So they'll have 3 numbers on the bag or bottle if you're getting fish emulsion. The first number is the nitrogen, the second number is the phosphorus, and the third number is the potassium. Now, a tip that I learned from working in greenhouses is it usually says on a bag or a bottle of fertilizer to use once a month. If you divide that portion by 4, use quarter strength once a week. So that's what I do. I use fish emulsion. It's a 511. It's an 1/8 of a cup per gallon of water, and I do that once a week. So let's talk a minute about compost. My colleague, Dr. Dirt, is going to give next Friday's webinar on composting. So I'm not going to go into a lot of composting. If you want to learn more about easy composting at home, I suggest you also sign up for Dr. Dirt's webinar next Friday at noon. He'll be getting you through all of composting. Composting is very easy. It was one of the main things I learned how to do when I became a master gardener, and now I swear by composting. So composting is easy. You can either have a pile. Your picture on the left is just piles. It works very well. My sister-in-law lives in Illinois. She gets her leaves all chopped up and shredded in the fall. She adds all her vegetables and other things from her kitchen all year long, and she just has this most beautiful compost all the time. So just a pile works. If you don't mind that look, a pile works. The center is, you may have seen these black bins. The top unscrews and it sits on the ground, and the top unscrews, and you just fill it up. If you live in Rhode Island, you can get one of these from Clean Ocean Access in Middletown, Rhode Island. On the right is a little kit you could buy. And you could also make one very easily yourself with a piece of fencing and zip ties. The main thing that you want to do is you want to have it to be able to hold a cubic yard. A cubic yard is important for getting the compost to be really heated up. So we have our site. We've amended our soil, and we're going to prepare our garden. But we're going to be careful about using raw manure. This is something that we don't recommend. Even though it has lots of nutrients, it can also be a source of human pathogens. So you need to be very, very careful with that. If you have animals, chickens, goats, etc., I am going to highly recommend that you not put that directly in your vegetable garden. You want to compost that first. So you really want to get it to a really high temperature so that it's really composted, and really don't want to harvest your crops until 120 days after applying manure. So I recommend, if you're going to use manure, when you put your garden to bed in the late fall, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, then put it on and mix it in and use your composted manure then, and just make sure that you're letting that sit all the end of the fall and through the winter until the next spring, and then it'll be safe. Our soil's fine. Now we need water. So we need to place our bed near a water source. Water weighs a lot. Water weighs approximately 8 pounds a gallon. If you need to carry water to your vegetable garden constantly, you're going to be exhausted and not really want to do that. You need to really water regularly. So vegetables don't need a ton of water. Actually, a lot of problems with fungal diseases is because people overwater. You need to water when the top 2 inches of soil are dry. 2 inches is approximately your index finger. So if you stick your index finger in the soil next to the plant, if it's dry, then you definitely need to water. I have to say, working the hotline, this is one of the biggest issues that we teach on the hotline is watering. You need to water in the morning, not at night. So a lot of people have problems with fungal diseases. Those are the ones that are most prevalent by people who don't water correctly. If you work, you go to work early in the morning, you come home, you have dinner about 6:30, 7:30, you turn on the sprinkler, you run the sprinkler for half an hour to an hour, and all that water sits there all night long. Now you might want to say, well, yeah, but Vivian, it rains sometimes at night too. And I was like, yes, it does. However, if it's raining night after night, you're going to have some fungal problems. And that's what people are doing wrong. They're running a sprinkler where all their plants, their leaves, everything is getting soaked night after night after night. And pretty soon you're having leaves that are curling, leaves that are spotting, and we see this all the time on the hotline. The first thing we ask on the hotline when we start seeing these leaf problems is, how are you watering? So you want to water at the root level. So watering with like a wand or just a hose, you can do that. If you need to water at night, you want to water right down at the root level. But if you can, I highly recommend trying to water in the morning. Drip irrigation is the best. It reduces water loss and really helps keep your plants disease-free. You can run soaker hoses, which are the best way to make sure that you're just getting this drip irrigation, I'm sorry. You don't have to get super fancy. You can get the bottom has these connector pieces. We can run soaker hoses down all the way down rows. That actually works very nicely. Those can be a little bit costly. You can get a timer. If you forget to water, watering really regularly is very important. You know, you don't want plants just getting super dry and then you're just, oh, I forgot to water this week. So then you water them for 3 hours. That doesn't really help. So this is what I recommend. This is what I do. So I get my bed ready. I've gotten my soil amended. I put in my compost, my peat moss, my vermiculite, and my bed is all ready. Then I lay out my soaker hose. So I lay out my soaker hose all the way through. Then I plant my plants. So I plant my plants in among these soaker hoses. And then once your plants are planted and coming up, then make sure you mulch them. And we're going to talk about mulch a little bit later, but mulching really keeps down on water loss and really helps keep the plants moist, and that will also reduce your watering. So soil, you want to make sure you got some well-drained soil. You want to have some, add some lime if you need to. You might, if you live in Rhode Island and you've never limed your soil before, it's very possible that you're going to need some lime. If your area is too rocky, you might need to try to use raised beds. We have a lot of rocks. For those of you who don't live in Rhode Island, one of the main things that people love about New England is all the rock walls. Well, we don't import the rocks. The rocks are always here, and they come up every winter. So you think you've screened your area, and every winter, every spring, you're digging up more and more rocks. So you can pick out your site in different areas. Try to have it as level as you can. You can rototill an area and then set your raised beds in your, as it's rototilled, that's the area on the right. Or you can do like a lasagna garden where you just set up your beds and, excuse me, set up your beds and fill them with soil. Either way is okay. You need to make sure that if you're going to use raised beds, that it's deep enough. You need at least 8 inches of depth. 12 inches is better for really deep roots. You can buy kits now that you can just buy a kit and put it together. Last year I work at a community garden here in Middletown, and last year some of our beds rotted and we had to replace them, and we bought raised bed kits at Home Depot, and they were cedar. So cedar is a good choice for making raised beds. It doesn't rot as easily, so that's also a good choice. And there are plenty of YouTube videos on how to make raised beds too. That's very simple. So when you're thinking about raised beds or beds in general, you need to make sure, where are you? If your sunny side is best, you really, if you're just having a lot of hill problems, you'd have to think seriously about terracing. Terracing is building terracing is a lot of work. It certainly can be done, but it's something that requires more labor. If you have a lot of wind, I live 1.5 miles from the Atlantic Ocean, and we have serious wind. So we have a wall of very tall arborvitaes on the south side of our property that really help with the wind. Now, here's something that you might want to think about, fencing. If you're like me, I don't have a fence around my property, and I have a real battle with rabbits. My rabbits just eat everything, and they're pretty prolific. So I have a pretty tall fence. Then you can do a fence pretty simply. Again, this is the stakes with the wire and zip ties is a pretty simple way to put up a fence. If you tend to have some areas where you have burrowing animals, I highly recommend as you're building your raised bed to put in some galvanized steel at the bottom so you don't have these burrowing animals. I don't know if some of you were at Nan Quinlan's talk on Tuesday night. She works at the demonstration garden at East Farm here at URI, and they have an impressive fence system to keep out animals, and they've even put up netting now, I think fish line up on the top for crows and birds that are just eating things. You got to make sure your fence is tall enough if you have deer. Deer can jump pretty tall. Again, my issue is these wascally rabbits. They're incredible. One year I planted peas in my garden, and it was like, oh my gosh, party at the Shawl house. The rabbits were digging and burrowing, and there were all kinds of animals just like, oh goody, peas. So that was the first and last time I ever grew peas, because they just were a very big attraction to my garden. So now what are you going to grow? There's lots of choices. Here are 5 questions to ask yourself. Well, what do you like to eat? How much time can I give to tending the garden? Really, gardening should be fun. I personally love gardening. I've been a lifelong gardener. I'm in my garden every day. You need to make sure you know how much light you have. How much should I plant? So the next slide will show that. How much space do you have? You have a small space, then you want to avoid sprawling plants or big plants. A squash or a zucchini plant is a fairly large plant. It's about a good 2 feet in diameter. It's a pretty large plant. You need to have a lot of space for that. You're going to grow pumpkins or winter squash. They sprawl out. They have lots of really big leaves. They need a lot of space. So how much should I plant? So this chart gives you a rough guide to figure out what 10 running feet will grow. Asparagus, you should know, is a perennial. So asparagus, you need to have space that's gonna be the asparagus space. It takes a while to establish asparagus. To save space, I highly recommend growing cucumbers vertically. I grow cucumbers vertically. Cucumbers tend to get dusty mildew, and which is a fungal problem with they get too wet. And so you can train cucumbers to grow upwards, and a trellis makes it really easy also to pick the cucumbers when they grow up a trellis. I also grow pole beans up on poles, and that's very easy to train beans to do that also. So you can save, if you have not a very big space, you can do a lot by getting some plants to grow vertically, which I highly recommend. But this slide will show you, just gives you some idea on what it takes to grow a certain amount of food. Be careful with your summer squashes. One year I planted 3 zucchini plants. I was leaving zucchini on people's doorsteps. We just had so much zucchini. I made zucchini bread. We did zucchini muffins. We were doing zucchini everything. My family was so sick of zucchini. So you got to be careful to know what you're planting. So seeds are transplants. Personally, I like starting a lot of plants from seed. I have a grow system in a spare bedroom. I find it very satisfying to go from a tiny seed to a harvested vegetable on my table. Of course, starting from seed is less expensive. You have a lot more variety, and you can pick things that you really want. However, transplants are easy. They make sense for a really busy gardener. You don't have the time or space to grow seeds. You really need to buy plants, support the local growers. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I just wanted you to look at that one picture of the transplant though. Do you see all the roots kind of bound up on the bottom there? One thing that not everyone knows is when you plant that, you need to loosen those roots a little bit. Gently pull those roots apart. Sometimes when people buy transplants, sometimes they've been growing for a while and all those roots are really root bound in that little tiny container. You need to loosen those up gently. You can break them up a little bit, loosen those gently before you plant them. Sometimes people will call in the hotline, I bought these transplants and they're not growing. Well, we always say, how did you plant them? Did you loosen the roots? There is a whole talk on seed starting and how to do it. And we'll get into some of seed starting. This is the Rhode Island planting calendar for fruits and vegetables. You can get this on the URI Cooperative Extension website. Just go to the website and search for this, Rhode Island Planting Calendar, and it'll come up and you can download this. This is a 2-page. Usually when we give this presentation in person, we have this printed for everyone, but virtually you're going to have to download it yourself. But this will show you in Rhode Island. I know some of you are not from Rhode Island. I don't know if you could ask your cooperative extension if they have something like this, but just to give you a little sense of how this works. So for asparagus, you want to grow plant crowns. So you'd have to buy plant crowns. S means that you're directly sowing seeds. T means transplants. And I means when you should start seeds indoors. So that's a very helpful tool. You know, some people email us on the hotline, you know, it's June. I bought some tomato seeds. Can I start them now? No, tomatoes need months and months between seed and harvest. So we don't have a long enough growing season for that. Maybe where you live, you do have a long enough growing season for that, but we don't. So growing your own transplants, I'm just going to touch on this a little bit. It's because we do have a whole nother talk on seed starting, but light is essential. Again, I've been working on the hotline. This is my 3rd season on the hotline, and we get this these questions a lot. You know, I started my seeds, they started out great. Now they look very leggy, they look weak. Then we always say, are you using grow lights or some sort of a additional light? Here in Rhode Island, we try to start seeds. You need to really start seeds in late February, early March. Tomatoes, you even need to start in earlier February. And we just don't have enough light. We just don't have enough daylight to do that. And even if you have a sunroom or something, we just don't have the enough sunny weather in the winter time to try to grow seeds without some additional lighting. Again, you can find a lot of YouTube videos on how to set up lights for seedlings. There's a lot of ways to do that. You don't have to buy anything pre-made or anything. Shop lights really work. You need to use a soilless mix. My personal favorite is the seed starting mix. Coast of Maine is a great mix for starting seeds. The soil temperature is more important than the air temperature. If you keep your house at about 68, 70 degrees, that should be fine. You can use a bottom heating. It's a special, it actually looks like a heating pad that you can plug in and put your seeds on top. That will help with germination. I usually buy my tomatoes, so I don't usually grow tomato plants. We have a good grower here that grows my favorite kind, so I let them grow my tomatoes. So tomatoes really want nice and warm temperatures for germination and growing. So people who grow tomatoes usually use these bottom heating pads. I don't usually do those. You really want to keep those moist from the bottom. Again, you don't want to get any fungal problems with those. A tip for doing that is a cup of chamomile tea. Make a cup of strong chamomile tea and mix it with a cup of water and water your baby seedlings with that. That'll keep the fungal problems that will cut the plant right at the soil level. That'll keep. Again, you want to use half strength. I would even say quarter strength again of fertilizer until the true leaves develop. The next slide is a sunroom. It shows plants growing in a sunroom. So this way, you can have the plants growing and keep them nice and warm. So when to plant outside? Well, timing is crucial. Knowing when your last and first frost dates are helps. We in Rhode Island, the last frost is usually May 15th. However, we are still having a pretty cool spring. This weekend is supposed to be nicer, but we're still having evenings in the 40s. So we're still kind of chilly. I'm going to talk more about hardening off on the next slide, but that's a weaning process for your plants. So you really want to wait till your night temperatures are above 50. We're still having, in Southern Rhode Island, we're still having temperatures in the evening in the 40s. So we're still a little bit on the cool side. If you're buying tomatoes and peppers especially, and they came out of a greenhouse, you want to make sure you're going to harden these off. And I'm going to explain that in just a minute here. Where our zone for Rhode Island is 6. For most of the state, here where I live, we're in about 6 to 7. So our last frost date is, again, like I mentioned, May 15th, and the first frost date is about October 15th. You can find out that information again from your local extension agent. I'm sorry. Okay, so you can plant cool season crops 55 to 70. So I planted my lettuce at, it was in April. So I hardened them off and set those outside at the end of April. So my lettuce has been in since the end of April, beginning of May. So cool weather plants like lettuce, cabbage, broccoli, etc., can be planted a little bit early. I also will plant another crop of lettuce in the fall, about the third week of August. I will start another crop of lettuce and they'll grow in through the fall. I grow my lettuce on the deck. I have quite a rabbit problem, so I don't grow lettuce in my garden. My lettuce is all in containers. So if you have problems with certain animals eating things, you can always plant in containers. Warm season plants grow best 65 to 85. So again, here's your tomatoes, cucumbers, summer squash, and winter squashes. Again, 65. We're not in 65. We're barely getting to be 65 for highs where I live. So we are not ready quite for transplanting some of these warm weather crops just yet. It's getting there. We're getting there. So what is hardening off? Well, it's a weaning process. You want to take your plants outside during the day when it's nice and warm, but then bring them in at night when it cools down. You want to place them in a shaded, protected spot, and slowly each day bring them out for more and more sunlight. You don't want to put them out when they're really super windy. You don't want to put them out in the pouring wet rain or when it's below 45 degrees. So I was putting lettuce out on the warmer days of April, but they lived in my dining room for every single night because it was just way too cold. You want to not water them as much. We're going to talk about cold frames or hoops. That we'll talk about that. You can use that. They provide an excellent way to harden off plants if you want to just transplant them directly into the garden. Again, like I said, I usually do my lettuce in pots, so it's easy to take them out and bring them in. But if you want to plant your lettuces and your turnips and your beets outside, I recommend this kind of hoop. It's a simple hoop with a covering. So frost is what's really going to kill plants. These cool weather plants, lettuces, kale, chard, they can handle the cold. They can't handle frost. So these covers are frost nets that the frost will build over at night, and during the day, as it warms up, the frost will melt and actually water the plants. One of the community gardens where I used to work used to do winter gardening all the time in a hoop house, which was a heavy plastic with row covers over the top. No heat. We just grew a lot of Swiss chard, kale. We grew a lot of lettuces. We grew a lot of Asian greens, but under these covers. So we had, every row had these hoops with the frost netting over the top. And then we didn't even water them because as the frost builds on the netting overnight, during the day in the hoop house, it could get really warm. It would be in the high 70s, low 80s, depending on how much sun we had that day. the frost would melt and water the plants. It's actually quite a great system. So after you hardening, you want to make sure that your plants can really tolerate the light. So you want to slowly get them to more and more sunlight. You don't want to put them out in a bright sunlight so that these baby plants scorch. So a few rules for planting transplants. You don't want to plant them too early. People get excited. You know, right now, this morning I was working outside in a flower garden, and it's a beautiful day. It's 73 degrees. I'm sure every garden store is packed today with people. They're very excited. It's finally warm. We're going to plant everything. Again, I want you to really be concerned about if you're buying plants and they're in a hoop house or in a greenhouse and you're taking them out, please be sure to harden those off before you plant them directly. Otherwise, you're going to be calling me on the hotline, or I'm not calling, emailing me on the hotline saying, you know, you said I could plant my plants and now they're burnt to a crisp. So please, don't be in a big rush to plant these warm weather plants. You want to keep in mind the plant's mature size. So if you're not sure, you can look that up, or it will say on the seed packet, if you're going to plant directly from a seed, how big a plant gets and how much space you need to leave. So you want to make sure that you have plenty of space. Like I said, a summer squash or a zucchini, you need a good 2 feet in diameter. They get quite big. You want to plant, when you're planting your transplants, you want to, again, loosen that root system. You want to plant those, and you want to give them water promptly. You don't want to plant, again, like I said, don't want to plant them in a high wind or bright sun really too early. Protecting from slugs and cutworms. We're actually going to get to that on another slide. So our plants are in the ground. Now comes the fun part. Now watching them grow is where it's really exciting. We want to make sure we keep the weeds down. Weeding is not really many people's favorite job. I personally like it. I put on music and I just spend time weeding. The more time you spend weeding, a little bit of time each day weeding really can keep things under control. It gets very overwhelming when you don't weed for a couple of weeks and the weeds just kind of take over. Like I had said before, when you were setting up your garden, mulch is very important. It helps to block the sunlight. It also helps to keep moisture in, especially when you're using drip irrigation. It really helps. I just use grass clippings. So I bagging grass occasionally, really for a lawn. If I was doing a lawn talk, I would say mulch your grass clippings. But occasionally bagging your grass clippings and using them as mulch is a free way to get mulch. You can use straw. Hay is mats too much and has its own problems with disease, but you can use straw. You can use newspaper. You can use cardboard, pine needles, pine bark. Anything can really be used. Any organic material can be used as a mulch. So you want to mulch also for weed control. This process where you put the plastic and you grow your plants in amongst the plastic, I've never had this work for me. The plastic gets pulled up. It doesn't really stay properly. I've never really had a lot of success for this, but it is used in a lot of places. So here's your straw mulch. your, that's what that looks like. You want to be careful. I mean, this picture, you want to be careful that you're not putting your mulch right up against your plants. This picture does look a lot like the plants are, the straw is up against the plants. I also want you to notice how these tomato plants are planted. They're planted along a stake in the ground, which is a really good way to train a tomato to go straight up a stake, and that'll help keep a tomato nice and straight and not leaning over. I train my tomatoes to do this too. I use them with a trellis system, and they have very gentle Velcro strips that you can buy in a garden store to help to train a tomato to go straight up. That's again, more vertical gardening is also helpful. So you have your plants in the ground, you've set up. Now we got to keep the critters out. We talked about fencing to help with the larger critters, but what about the smaller critters? Well, we try to use resistant cultivars that are not going to are more resistant to pests. And you really want to monitor your garden regularly. So I spend, every day checking plants, looking at plants, just want to check things if there's problems. I also keep a jar of soapy water. So you can, if you're finding insects, you can pick them off by hand, drop them in the soapy water. You can cultural controls are a good method. So for instance, like for an example, zucchini and squash are susceptible to the squash vine borer. It's a moth. It lays its eggs in the stem of the zucchini. You don't see it. They're tiny eggs. The eggs hatch. This tiny larval burrows into the stem of the zucchini. You're looking at your zucchini or your squash and it looks great, and then one day the entire thing is dead, and you're emailing the hotline. What happened? I don't know what happened to my zucchini. Well, you could cut that stem open and you'll see all these little tiny larvae of this squash vine borer. Now, how do you know it's there? Well, the best thing is to wait. Don't plant your squash or zucchini till third week of June. Then the moth that lays these eggs has already laid her eggs somewhere else, not in your zucchini, and you won't have that problem. So that's a cultural control to know when to plant some things. So that's another thing that you can, and learn to identify some common problems for your crops. One common problem is blossom end rot in tomatoes. Tomatoes really like a little bit more calcium. So I use fish emulsion on my garden, but when I plant my tomatoes, I dig a nice big hole for them, and I give each tomato plant about a half a cup of bone meal mixed in with the soil. Bone meal is a good source of calcium, and tomatoes need a little extra calcium that they may not be getting from the soil. So give them a little help with for your tomatoes, and that will avoid that common problem. So you want to use pesticides as the last resort. Here at URI, where we don't recommend pesticides. First of all, pesticides are very toxic. They're very toxic to bees especially, but they're toxic to children. They're toxic to pets. we don't recommend pesticides until it's an absolute last resort. So you still have some problems. Well, what ate my transplants? What ate my seedlings? Severed seedlings that are lying on the ground are cutworms. So if you're having problems with cutworms, you can put a little collar. The best thing is to cut a yogurt container. The yogurt containers work great. You can use a yogurt container, cut out the bottom, place it over the little seedling into the ground, stick it into the ground, and then cutworms will not be able to get to your plant. If the tops are totally eaten off, well, that could be deer, woodchucks, rabbits, voles. At my house, it's always rabbits. I do get deer, some deer that will eat some things. I put in some new shrubs a couple of years ago, and over the winter, the shrubs were eaten like right almost down to the ground. Luckily, the shrubs actually did survive, which was very surprising. But so fencing is what you really need if you're having problems with that. Nothing is left but the plastic label. Well, there's some slugs. So you can use some diatomaceous earth, dust. That's the best thing for slugs. You can put out a little dish of beer. That works for slugs too. They'll be attracted to it, and you can kill them that way. But some of that you have to actually replace after each rain. We had a pretty wet April, but right now we've been drier. So I've seen a few slugs in my garden, but they don't seem to be overly a problem, and I've just been picking them off. Even the label was pulled up. Well, there you're having some bird problems where you can cover your garden with netting or use some fluttering objects. I actually buy pinwheels. I have a whole series of pinwheels for my garden. I get them at the dollar store. They're pretty in the wind. We have a lot of wind here in Middletown, and they spin around. And so far so good. If I don't plant peas and I get my lettuce planted on the deck, I usually don't have any problems with that. We're almost done. Some season extenders here. Again, we talked about those row covers. So here's some examples of how these row covers work. And I think I explained that pretty well. Oh, this is interesting. This slide didn't
Yeah, try clicking it and seeing if the stuff comes up. Click it one more time. Sometimes.
Oh, here we go. Oh, okay. I see. So there we go. We want to harvest your tender vegetables before the frost. That's all the warm weathers. The colder temperatures may burn, but if you have them under row covers, you should be able to handle that. The real cold weather champs are beets and Brussels sprouts. Again, the collards, kale. You can grow those. As long as they're not getting frost on them, you can grow those. You want to remove your diseased plants and discard them. You want to bag and trash them. You don't want to put them in your compost. Test your soil again in the fall so that if you need to amend your soil, it takes about 3 months for lime to really change your soil pH if you have acidic soil. And you want to add compost and till it into the garden. You can plant a winter rye. That's planting a winter rye acts as like a green manure. You keep that over the winter. It'll keep, especially if you have a lot of wind. planting a winter rye will really hold so you don't have soil erosion. And so preparing your soil now means that you can work it more easily in the spring. So again, winterizing, you want to make sure that you you can turn it over. If you want to turn over your soil, plant your winter rye. And just winter rye grows fairly quickly. You just water it, and it really adds a lot of nutrients to your soil. Fall, winter, spring. Harvest, clean up, get through the winter, get your catalogs out and plan for spring. Then you spring into gardening. Early preparation will give you the big head start in the spring. I'm just going to make a plug for the hotline here. The hotline resources, you can email us. We're here for you to answer all your gardening questions. We're here Monday through Thursday. So we're here for all your hotline questions. And that's it. Back to Vanessa.
Hi, everybody. I've got my helper here. She woke up from her nap. So Vivian, that was wonderful. That was a great soup to nuts. I learned so much, and I think super extensive information. You brought in lots of good extension references and resources, and we hope you all will have a bountiful harvest this year. And if not, everything's a learning experience, right, Vivian? So it's all
absolutely
something out, writing things down, what worked, what didn't. We hope you'll join us again Tuesdays at 7, Fridays at noon. We have a different topic and a different speaker every single time. There's our gardening resources website, but really you can just Google URI Cooperative Extension Rhode Island Planting Calendar to find that. If you want to just hit the next slide. Oh. We invite you to join us and become a Master Gardener if you're a lifelong learner who's really interested in helping your community and helping educate others. The application process will open up in June and close November 1st. So it's an online application. There should be one in every single state if you want to become a Master Gardener in your own state. It's all about train the trainer. So we train you, you go to classes from different faculty members and learn how to educate others through wonderful projects in the community, like we mentioned earlier. And the next few years with the URI Master Gardener program, we're all going to be focused on strengthening the local food system and teaching people to grow their own food, just like today. Right, Stella?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that it? Is there one more?
Yeah.
Great. And just wanted to, as you exit the webinar today, we ask you to please complete our survey, which will help us evaluate, if you learned anything and if you're gonna change your behavior. And that's what we're all about, helping people improve their behavior so they're more successful in the garden, improve the environment with their practices. And again, happy gardening to everybody. Please complete that survey so we can keep offering this wonderful free service to you all. And thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
That was fabulous. Air claps. We had, by the way, up to 562 participants. So that was a record.
Wow.
That's incredible. Feels like you're talking yourself, but there's 562 people out there.
Great job, Vivian.
I would have been more nervous if it